A space station the size of a small moon is falling toward the Earth, wrapped in fire. Two hedgehogs fly toward it, glowing gold, faster than the atmosphere burning around them. One of them is a hero. The other one was built from scratch in a laboratory to be a weapon. And right now, mid-flight, with the planet's entire population about to be wiped off the map, that second hedgehog is remembering a promise he made to a dying girl 50 years ago. A promise he has spent his entire life misunderstanding. To get why a living weapon ends up being one of the two things standing between humanity and extinction, we have to go back. Not hours, not days, 50 years, to a research station floating above the Earth called the space colony Ark. Professor Gerald Robotnik is one of the greatest scientific minds humanity has ever produced, and he is up there for one reason. His granddaughter, Maria, is dying. She has a disease with no cure, something eating away at her immune system, and the government agency funding Gerald's research, GUN, the Guardian Units of Nations, wants something else out of the deal. They want a weapon, an immortal, unstoppable life form they can use for war. So Gerald builds both at once. He calls his creation Project Shadow, and what comes out of it is a black and red hedgehog engineered to be the ultimate life form. Gerald hopes that whatever makes Shadow immortal can be reverse-engineered into a cure for Maria. Here's the part that matters, though. Shadow isn't raised as a weapon. He's raised next to Maria. They become friends. The closest thing either of them has. She's a sick kid who's never once set foot on the planet she can see from her window. He's an artificial life form who's never once felt like this station is anything other than a prison. Together, they spend hours just staring down at Earth, imagining what it's like to actually stand on it. Then Gunn decides Gerald's research has gone too far. Soldiers storm the Ark. It's supposed to be a raid on the lab. It ends up being a massacre. And in the chaos, as Maria drags Shadow toward an escape pod, trying to get him off the station before the soldiers reach them, a bullet finds her. She survives just long enough to hit the launch switch and send Shadow's pod hurtling toward Earth. Her actual last words to him are simple. She asks him to give the people of that planet a chance to be happy. But Shadow doesn't process it that way. Not in the moment. What he registers is his best friend dying in front of him because of the very species she was trying to save him for. Grief curdles into rage almost instantly, and Gunn, not wanting a living weapon roaming free after what just happened, captures him and seals him away in cryogenic storage. Gerald is taken too and eventually executed for what his research had unleashed. Shadow spends the next 50 years frozen, alone with one sentence, replaying. There's something worth sitting with here before the story moves on. The words we walk away with after we lose someone are rarely the ones that were actually said. Grief edits. It simplifies a complicated last moment into something our mind can carry. And more often than not, it carries the version that hurts the most, not the version that's true. Shadow didn't choose to remember Maria's death as a call to revenge. His mind did that for him because rage is easier to hold on to than helplessness. It gives you somewhere to point, a cause, something to do with the unbearable feeling of having watched someone die for you and having done nothing to stop it. A lot of people carry a version of this. Not a laboratory-built hedgehog frozen for half a century, but the same basic mechanism, a memory that's been quietly rewritten by pain until it only serves one purpose, justifying the wall you've built since. The dangerous part isn't the grief itself, it's mistaking the edited version for the truth and building the next 50 years of your life on top of it without ever going back to check. Present day. Dr. Eggman, Gerald's grandson, breaks into the military facility where Shadow has been kept and finds the capsule. He tries a password, Maria, and it works. He wakes the ultimate life form, hands him a Chaos Emerald to restore his full power, and finds himself standing next to something he did not expect. A hedgehog who looks, moves, and fights almost exactly like his archenemy. That resemblance is about to ruin Sonic's week. Shadow steals a Chaos Emerald from a government convoy in Central City, gets seen doing it, and because he's mistaken for Sonic, Gunn arrests the wrong hedgehog. Sonic gets hauled off to a military prison for a crime he didn't commit, while the actual culprit is off starting a partnership with Eggman. Sonic breaks out, because of course he does, and reconnects with Tails, who's been tracking the situation from the outside. Together, they start pulling the thread. Who is this second hedgehog? Why does Eggman suddenly have backup? And what exactly is Project Shadow? Meanwhile, Knuckles gets dragged into his own mess. Eggman and a jewel thief named Rouge the Bat both come after the Master Emerald that Knuckles guards, and in the scuffle over it, the emerald shatters into pieces that scatter across the world, and eventually into orbit. Knuckles, understandably furious, briefly assumes Sonic is somehow behind it too, before the truth sorts itself out and he joins the hero side for real. Rouge, for her part, isn't just working for Eggman. She's a government operative, quietly gathering intelligence on Shadow and the Ark the whole time, playing both sides while handing Eggman a Chaos Emerald to keep her cover intact. With 6 emeralds collected between the 3 of them, Eggman, Shadow, and Rouge head to the Ark, where Shadow reveals something Gerald built that even Eggman didn't know about. The Eclipse Cannon, a weapon capable of leveling entire cities, hidden inside the station itself. Eggman powers it up and live on every screen on the planet fires it. Not at Earth yet, just as a warning shot. The beam slices clean through part of the moon. He gets on a call with the president of the United Federation and makes it simple: surrender or his country goes next. Watch what happens to Eggman the second that threat lands. He doesn't celebrate. He gets angry, agitated, unsatisfied, because deep down a threat like that was never really about the moon or the cannon. It was about being taken seriously, finally, completely, by a world that, in his mind, has spent his whole career underestimating him. That's usually what's underneath the loudest shows of force, whether it's a cannon aimed at a planet or something a lot smaller and closer to home. Not confidence, but the exhausting need to prove something to people who were never going to be convinced anyway. The people most desperate to be feared are almost never the people who feel powerful. They're the ones still trying to answer a much older question about whether they matter at all. Sonic and Tails intercept the president's convoy, hack into what they can, and confirm Eggman's base of operations is the Ark itself. While Knuckles heads off into space to hunt down the scattered pieces of the Master Emerald, Sonic and Tails build a plan. Swap out the real final Chaos Emerald for a fake one, so when Eggman loads it into the cannon, the whole system shorts out instead of firing on Earth. They make it aboard the Ark and start digging through old research logs, and this is where the full picture of Project Shadow finally comes together for them. Maria, the disease, the promise, the raid, all 50 years of it laid out in files nobody was ever supposed to read again. And that's really the hinge the whole story turns on. Somebody's worst, most defining moment, the raid, the gunshot, the 50 years of frozen rage, exists as nothing more than a line item in an old research log to everyone except the person who lived it. Shadow has spent half a century treating one sentence as the entire truth of who he is, while the rest of the world simply filed it away and moved on. That gap between how enormous a single moment feels to the person inside it and how small it looks to everyone standing outside it is where a lot of quiet damage gets done. It's why it matters to actually ask people what happened to them instead of assuming you already know the shape of their pain from the outside. The record and the wound are almost never the same size. The sabotage works, but not the way anyone planned. The fake emerald doesn't just stop the cannon. It exposes something much worse buried underneath it. Gerald Robotnik, it turns out, never fully recovered from watching Gunn execute him after they'd already taken Maria. His final recorded message isn't a scientist's log, it's a threat. He rigged the Ark itself, not just the cannon, to fall out of orbit and crash directly into the Earth, timed to a countdown as one last act of revenge against the species that destroyed his family. Now the cannon misfiring doesn't matter anymore. The whole station is coming down and there's a very short window to stop it. Amy finds Shadow near the heart of the Ark, and for the first time, it isn't a fight about a stolen jewel or a case of mistaken identity. It's Shadow, finally being asked to sit with what he's spent 50 years avoiding. What did Maria actually ask him to do? And in that moment, the memory plays all the way through, uninterrupted by grief for once. Not revenge. She asked him to give humanity, the same species that killed her, a chance to be happy. That's what he promised. That's the promise he's been breaking every single day. He let the rage speak for her instead. Shadow turns. But the Ark isn't done fighting back. Deep in its core, Gerald's original prototype, a monstrous, half-finished attempt at the ultimate life form called the Biolizard, wakes up and takes control, determined to finish what Gerald started. Shadow throws himself at it alone, while Sonic and Knuckles race to an emergency shrine, hoping the Master Emerald can shut the whole system down. It buys them time, but not the win. The Biolizard survives, teleports outside the station, and fuses itself onto the Ark's hull, transforming into something bigger and far more dangerous. Final hazard. This is the fight neither of them can win alone. Sonic and Shadow both go super and together, not one carrying the other, but side by side. They tear Final Hazard apart in open space as the Ark keeps falling. Only once it's down do they combine the full power of all 7 Chaos Emeralds into one Chaos Control powerful enough to teleport the entire station away from Earth at the very last second before impact. The planet is safe, but the cost isn't shared equally. Shadow, having pushed his body past anything it was built to handle, goes completely still and starts to fade, drifting off alone into space. Sonic makes it out. The story ends without confirming whether Shadow does too. Here's what actually stays with me about this one. Shadow wasn't built to be good or bad. He was built to be useful. A weapon, an experiment, a means to an end for other people's plans. First Gerald's, then Gun's, then Eggman's. Nobody in his life ever asked him who he wanted to be. Everyone just told him what he was for. And the one person who did treat him like more than that, who saw him as a friend instead of a function, died, saying something he was too devastated to actually hear. He spent 50 years serving the version of her words that let him stay angry, because anger was easier to carry than grief. It wasn't until he was standing at the edge of the very last moment he'd ever get that he finally let himself hear what she'd really said. I think that's true for more of us than we'd like to admit. We inherit roles from a family, a job, a bad breakup, a version of ourselves that made sense once, and we keep performing them long after the moment that created them has passed, because it's familiar, because it's easier than asking whether it's actually still true. The people who shaped us rarely get the final word on who we become. We do. Shadow was made in a lab to be a weapon. He chose, in the end, to be the thing Maria actually asked for. So here's the question I'll leave you with. Is there a version of yourself you're still performing because of something someone said or something that happened years ago? One you've never actually gone back to check was true? Let me know in the comments, and thank you for watching.